Welcome to the Regista Room, the podcast where soccer goes off field. Here's your host, Paul Varian.
Episode 12, folks, of the Regista Room. Can't believe we're at episode 12. Seems like only yesterday we were on episode 1. But welcome one and all, wherever you're from. Very proud to say the Regista Room is now in, 17, 18 countries, last time I checked. All over the world. Australia, Asia, South America, Middle East, North America, of course, Europe, all kinds of great places. So welcome wherever you're tuning in for this latest topic. So before I get into the main topic for the day, I want to talk to you about a few, questions or comments we had on email from our last episode, which is, if you recall, was about how technical directors are transitioning into broader sport general management and becoming very effective executive directors. We had 3 in particular questions, or comments should I say, I'd like to point out to you today. The first one was, why do you need an executive director? Make the technical director the top dog and just hire an administrative manager to manage all the paperwork. Well, that's a good comment actually, because that's actually how a lot of clubs work these days. Usually the technical director is the first person to reach some sort of an executive capacity, and they usually end up becoming, as a result, the de facto executive director. But that's not necessarily good because they're not trained in those areas. Interesting, I lecture a technical director's diploma here in Canada, in British Columbia and Ontario, and most of the content I actually lecture is business training, budgeting, strategic planning, leadership, people management, governance, all that kind of stuff. And the reason that that's on the course is because these guys who are great coaches and great coach leaders sometimes don't have the skills to manage life in a boardroom. So your question is, or point is, well made. It's often how organizations go, but quite frankly, I think it's dangerous to put somebody in a position of executive leadership that doesn't have the training. So as we said on that episode last time, technical directors can make great executive directors, but they've got to have the training and support to be effective. Second one was, I'm just a coach. Can I still become an executive director? Well, of course you can. You don't have to be a technical director to move across to be an executive director. All I will tell you is, usually boards are going to look for some sort of experience in leadership or knowledge of leadership. So it's quite hard to do that and move into a position like that if you haven't led coaches or led people in some sort of a way. So yes, of course, technically speaking, you can become an executive director if you're a great coach that maybe in your day job, if you're not working full-time in soccer, has examples of good people leadership and organizational leadership. You can become an ED that way. You certainly don't have to go through the technical director route to get there. And the third one, my favorite of all, blue suits or track suits, who cares? The whole system is rigged. I love it. Nothing like a good deep state person to make sure that we're all keeping on our toes. Well done for that, conspiracy theorist, whoever you are. The whole system is rigged, I'm sure, and we're all just playing along. But well done, and thank you for pointing that out. So let's move on to the discussion we're going to have today, where we're going to loop back into a topic that we went in depth into in a broader sense a few episodes ago when we looked at revenue development. But we're going to look more specifically today at fundraising. Fundraising, the area of revenue development that frankly has been completely ignored for the large part, from a structural sense at least, by amateur sport. Yes, we do chamois and bake sales and all kinds of things to help athletes or teams pursue short-term sport objectives, but we're very bad as a system compared to like the arts or hospitals or healthcare or other charitable organizations, religion in particular, at structurally fundraising to ensure that our operations are covered through that revenue line. As such, we do very, very bad raising any significant sums of money compared to what we raise from fee-based pay-to-play revenue models. But I think, folks, this is going to change soon, and it has to change because we cannot keep putting prices up on fees. Parents are pretty much tapped out, I think, at this stage, and government isn't coming, at least in this country, in Canada, with any new money anytime soon. So if we want to continue to fund an increasingly complex soccer system, we have to find new lines of revenue, and the only one I can see that's untapped right now is fundraising. So, we are going to have a deeper dive into this area today, and we're going to talk to two organizations that I think are going to be really, really compelling. One of whom helps organizations do this and has had enormous, incredible results in the US, raising literally millions and millions of dollars for amateur soccer organizations. So, this isn't makey uppy guys. These guys know what they're doing. You need to listen to them. And another organization in Canada who's been on this podcast before, who has just announced the launch of a new endowment fund. And this is very special to me because this is one of the few organizations outside of the big Olympic foundations or other big sports governing bodies in the country that's actually had the audacity to try to get serious about fundraising. So we're going to speak to both those organizations. Compelling interviews coming up. Stay with me on the Regista Room, where amateur soccer goes off field.
Are you an amateur sport leader looking for quality professional development? If so, your search is over. Introducing Capitus Consulting's new sport business tutorial series. We'll teach you what you need to do to run your club better. These tutorials target the key areas of sport business: governance, risk, planning, marketing, technical oversight, sponsorship, and modern volunteerism. Access and enjoy these tutorials when you want and where you want.
Go to capituslearning.com
and get learning with me today.
Do you have a story to tell? The Regista Room is built on real-world stories and experiences from amateur soccer clubs everywhere that we can explore, discuss, and learn from. Have you innovated a solution to a problem, challenged the norm, tried something different, thought outside the box, or taken a risk, and it's paid off? If so, we want to hear from you on the Regista Room. Contact us today with your story at content@registaroom.com, and let's better the game with our shared soccer experiences.
Welcome back, and I'm really pleased to introduce you now to our first guest, who's actually making his second appearance on the Regista Room. Miles Spencer is the CEO of Rugby Ontario. And the reason I've decided to have Miles back is recently Rugby Ontario made a very bold announcement that they are launching their very first endowment fund for the sport of rugby in the province of Ontario in Canada. This is quite exciting news because very few sports organizations either have the foresight nor the ability to actually start saving money on endowment fund principles. Now, they have a perfect place to house this endowment in the Rugby Canada Foundation. That's where they're going to put it. I was before speaking with Miles, if you recall, on a previous episode about strategic planning, and it was actually in that planning process that Rugby Ontario set the seeds for building such an idea of an endowment. But as often happens with plans, I was, to be honest, skeptical as to whether or not they'd actually get there with it. A lot of people have great ideas on raising money or saving money or diversifying revenue, but they very rarely execute on it very well. And that's not through lack of intent. It's usually through lack of capacity or know-how, or sometimes prioritization. But Rugby Ontario have done it. They've announced it. They've started with some seed capital themselves, and they are building a fund, which you're going to hear from this interview, is really, really well strategically directed to an area where they feel is very important for their game. Have a listen. Miles Spencer from Rugby Ontario.
Miles Spencer from Rugby Ontario, welcome back to the Regista Room.
It's great to be back, Paul. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, well, you're one of the incredible people who've come back. Normally my guests are one and done, Miles, but you did such a great job with the first one. We had to have you back, especially with the compelling news that you announced that I was very excited to see last month regarding Rugby Ontario's decision to start an endowment fund for Rugby Ontario. Maybe you can just give our listeners a bit of a background as to how you came to that decision, and maybe a little bit about the foundation that I know pre-exists this endowment.
Yeah, well, thank you for picking that up and acknowledging it. It's certainly an exciting initiative that we've launched very recently. It's been something that's certainly been in the works for quite some time, and there's I would say that there is a story that backs this in terms of where we've come from in the recent few years and coming out of the tumultuous times of the COVID-19 pandemic and ultimately recovering from that point in time. But I'll start by just saying this isn't just about creating a fund for our organization, for our sport. It's about changing the trajectory of how Rugby in Ontario supports its people, and those be athletes, coaches, match officials, and it's really about ensuring that there's an opportunity in our sport based on ability and commitment, not financial circumstance. And what I mean by that is we've often heard and we know that financial barriers exist, not just in rugby, right across sport. And that's been a reality that we've faced in terms of how we've launched programming, and particularly our representative programming, our Team Ontario initiatives that we deliver on an annual basis. And so, what we've done as an organization is really look to launch an initiative that was something that we put into our strategic plan, our last strategic plan back in 2022, and that was to invest in the future, invest in our future. And when I say our, I mean in the sport of rugby in the province. So this is an exciting time. We've found ourselves as an organization in a position where we had the financial health to be able to make this sort of very progressive landmark decision. And so here we are. So pleased to chat with you about it.
Well, two things that strike me in what you said there, which are very encouraging. The first one is that you didn't just decide we have a revenue gap, we need some money, let's go ask for it, which is sometimes a very clumsy way of raising funds, which is usually ineffective because there's really not a compelling reason for people to give. And secondly, that you've got strategy driving these decisions. And I was very honored to be part of the process of building that plan in 2022. It's held up by many organizations, you should know, as a real best in class. So great work on it. And it was interesting working on that plan back in 22. How much work we did, Miles, on identity, if you recall. We spoke so much about not necessarily what goals were over the next 5 years, but what the sport was going to be in this province moving forward. And there were some steps over the next 5 years that we were going to take to start that. But this was a kind of a longer term journey. And obviously, you've got affordability in there, which is great. This is one of these goals. Can you speak to how this endowment sort of would execute what your vision is for rugby in Ontario? Like, if I'm a potential donor, what would compel me to want to get my checkbook out?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I think it starts with our vision, and that's simple. It's rugby for all, and that's something that was a real shift in, our previous vision statements, if you will, and really putting focus on making rugby truly the most inclusive sport in the province, and the country for that matter. And so we took a leap towards identifying a number of different outcomes that we wanted to try to realize as an organization, as a sport governing body, over the period of the strategic cycle that we had developed together. And one of those, as I mentioned already, was investing in the future. And so part of that was about the foundation of our organization, not the foundation of financially speaking, but the foundation of our organization, who we are and how we operate. And so when we looked to set out to sort of deliver against that particular strategy, one of them was about future sustainable funding models, and the endowment was one. And so we've actually been fortunate in the last few years to benefit from an initial endowment fund that we've placed into the Canadian Rugby Foundation, which is a standalone organization that's doing great work to support fundraising and philanthropy that is going right back into our sport community across the country. And that was on the backs of the sale of Fletcher's Fields, which was a historic and iconic rugby venue in the province, located in Markham, Ontario, and Rugby Ontario being one of 6 shareholders in that. I was able to benefit from, obviously, the proceeds of that sale that have gone directly into an endowment within the Canadian Rugby Foundation. So that was an initial, call it tactical initiative that we were able to get on almost immediately after launching our strategic plan. But that was really not where we wanted to stop. And in recent time, we've come out of the pandemic. Obviously, I mentioned that. Everybody has. We acknowledged how hard that was on our business, just like many other sport organizations, large and small. And what we really tried to do was emphasize disciplined governance and financial stewardship within, our 4 walls, knowing the obligation that we had to continue to support the growth of our sport in Ontario, to continue supporting our member organizations and those that are enjoying rugby, whether it be as an athlete, a coach, referee, volunteer. And so we had to stabilize before we could start to innovate, right? We did make that progressive endowment investment through the Fletcher's Fields contribution, but that was all kind of on the coming out of the COVID pandemic timing. But after the rebuilding process started and we started to recover as an organization, we were able to really start to focus on tightening up within so that we could maintain strong financial position, generate year over year resources that allow us to continue to support the community, continue to build new programming initiatives, but also to build confidence in our ability to utilize some of that financial strength, if you will, to put it to work. And so we found ourselves in a position where we could really focus on what we've known to be one of the largest structural barriers in our sport, and that's the pay-to-play model. And what really got us thinking was how life in general is becoming more expensive. The cost of doing business is going up, not down, right? And we're all facing that in society and in our respective industries. But we were looking at the situation more specifically with respect to our Ontario provincial programs, our representative teams, and the huge reliance on athletes, having to front the bill. And that was something that was long-standing. It still exists even in some cases at a national level. And I have had a vision, and as an organization, we share the vision of looking to eradicate that, once and for all. And so we found ourselves coming out of the recovery efforts over the last few years and really rebuilding the house and found ourselves in a position where we could make this decision. And so we've gone ahead to do that. And that vision of this new endowment fund is fluid. We started with a thought, and that thought is blossoming into so many things. And so we've got some efforts very recently to identify some individuals that will help steer that endowment fund going forward as a sort of founding steering committee, and those individuals will be charged with some real responsibility to help lead and guide the creation of the model that will ultimately put funds back into the community game.
Yeah, so many questions coming to mind. Before I ask my next question, though, you mentioned making sure that when athletes reach a certain level of performance, that they're not asked to put their hand in their pocket. It reminded me instantly of when I first took over Irish hockey. Wow, this was 2003, 2004. Anyway, long time ago, over 20 years ago. And to my horror, I noticed, Miles, that the national team players were being asked to pay for their own playing kit. And I was horrified because, like, the notion that you would make the sacrifices, financial time, commitment, everything to reach the highest level of the game in the country and then be asked to pay $49.99 for your jersey and shorts was just a terrible message to me. It's the first thing
Yeah.
I changed. So I think it's a really good place to start. Just out of recognition for that level of commitment that those fine young people are putting in, and the coaching staff for that matter. My question is, you know, sports traditionally hand to mouth, right? And you mentioned pay to play model, and I've pay to play model, excuse me, and I've seen lots of sport organizations who've attempted to accrue capital on their balance sheet, whether through a structured piece that you're doing or some restricted funds or what have you. And they've come under enormous political pressure from membership or other stakeholders to stop saving that money and invest it into programs which are fluid and disappear once the money has been consumed. Did you get any of that pressure, or has the announcement of the endowment generally gone down well with the stakeholders in the game here?
Yeah, obviously we're sort of early days in this endeavor, but there has been support. And it was actually great to see members of our community asking the questions or even making the suggestion to us at our annual member meeting last year about, look, your financial statements paint a great picture overall. You've got cash. How can we put that cash to work? Can we start to build with those resources. And so we all obviously have made a decision that is to utilize some of those funds to seed an endowment fund. And from that, we will look to grow that fund through some strategic fundraising and philanthropy campaigns. But like I said off the top, we don't, this isn't just about sort of a short-term fundraising campaign, light the match and hopefully it stays burning, right? We all know that that match will end up burning out. This is about creating a legacy for the sport, to obviously create a financial platform that will allow us to generate future income off of that will go right back into supporting community members first and foremost, and future programming that will hopefully stand up the future of our sport.
Wow, I just think it's fantastic that your members at that meeting had the the maturity and the vision to encourage you to invest those reserves. Because a lot of AGMs I see people are standing up saying, "Stop saving that money, reduce fees."
Mhm.
Yeah, ironically, one of the things you're proposing to do with that capital is to provide targeted financial support rather than reduce the fees of everyone, including people who can pay it. And I think this is a really important component of smart tackling of affordability in sport. Is it's not a blanket issue. You know,
Mhm.
plenty of people can afford, but so target the people who can't, and you need to do that through a program like this. Is this a sort of a cultural decision that you've made as a sport here to sort of change the dynamic of how you think about the game, not just from a revenue standpoint, but from a sort of an identity standpoint?
That's a great question, and how you frame that. I would say yes, it's a bit of both. Certainly, we this has been a heavily board supported undertaking. So I'll just start with that. Our endowment fund, um, and our board are progressive in their thinking around this. But yeah, I think I hadn't really considered the identity piece, but having you frame it that way is very interesting. Um, we know and we've known for quite some time that we've got to look to diversify our revenue streams and build more financial resilience within the organization so that we're not dependent on a single source, or maybe two sources, which would be um, our membership and government grants. And while it's easy to say that, it's certainly harder to put that into action when we're dealing with pretty well every level of our sector fighting the same fight. And it's in many ways discouraging to see that it's affecting athletes at the highest level in their respective sports. At the same time, I think anybody close to this would understand what the challenges are, and why they are what they are. But I think what we're looking to try and do, and we're just taking initial steps. Of course, we've been working at this for quite some time, but we're looking to try and focus on the opportunities. And one of those opportunities, which maybe 5 years ago wasn't a clear, outcome, was being in the position that we found ourselves within the last 12 to 18 months, where we can start to have these strategic, innovative conversations about, hey, look, we might be able to put some money away and seed something that can grow exponentially, perpetually. So, one of the other things that we do on an annual basis is we run a marquee event in partnership with the Toronto Intercity Rugby Foundation, and that's called Rugby in the Square. And that's a growing event that is um, has a mission to draw awareness and attention for making youth sport accessible and inclusive in Toronto and across the province. And of course, we use the event, which is a rugby event. It's a corporate rugby event where we bring down about 32 teams representing businesses across multiple sectors, private sector companies, some of the biggest in our country, multinational businesses that come down, play a little rugby, raise some money, and the proceeds from that event go right back into supporting grassroots rugby, scholarships for young adults, supporting subsidies for provincial and national team players that are pursuing the pathway. So it's pretty exciting. That's been growing year on year. And that just represents another example of kind of the the tactical ways we're looking to try and grow our revenue streams.
So would the idea be that events that event and events like it would there would be money going into the endowment fund, not necessarily all of it, but some of it will go in there. You'd look at
Yeah.
building fundraising mechanisms to keep feeding this fund. Yeah, good.
Yeah, 100%. And Paul, like one of the things that I think is important to say here is we took an initial step. We've announced an endowment fund. We've seeded it ourselves. We've put an initial contribution into that fund that is to the benefit of rugby participants in this province. And one of our goals is absolutely going to be to sustain those contributions over time. And so, my hope, and I obviously have responsibility to make it happen, is to find ourselves in the position at the end of every year where we can make a contribution from, the growth of our sport, if you will. And when I say that, I don't mean just participation, that we're in a position where we can make a monetary contribution into our own fund to help grow that over time. So it's you could call it leading by example, but I'm not suggesting that we're trying to make an example of anything. It's really just about showing our donors, our sponsors, and our partners that we're doing this as well. We're putting skin in the game to make sure that we can make rugby as inclusive and as accessible as we possibly can to work towards that goal of removing pay to play for anyone that, on merit alone, has the ability to represent our province as a player or coach or a referee. And for those that might ultimately pursue the national team honors, is that they might be able to find support in that endeavor as well.
It sounds like you sort of had a three-part process to this. The first one was kind of building a common vision, which in your case was very much around, for the large part, but not exclusively, ensuring your top athletes don't have financial barriers to represent the province and be their best. And then you spoke a lot about sort of building a coalition around that, which you talk strongly about community and building people who really sign up to that vision. And then you've spoken about sort of enshrining that in strategy, which I think was a really important step. Because say Miles Spencer moved on, or say some of those important champions of this in Rugby Ontario moved on, what's the structured commitment to this moving beyond that? If a whole load of new actors came in and thought this was a waste of time. So the fact you've got it in strategy kind of cements it, at least in the short to medium term. Is that a kind of a good 3-point analysis of what you're saying before you even look at building the mechanics of this, whether it's a foundation, whether it's an endowment, whether it's, engaging fundraising partners or going donor hunting or whatever it is just, it sounds like there's the bottom of the iceberg that's very important in terms of what it is that people would be passionate about and will actually be prepared to open up capital for. Who's behind it, so it's not just you against the world, and how is it structured so the organization clearly benefits? Is that a reasonable summary?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
in 10 to 15 years, this may be one of the most important decisions Rugby
absolutely.
Ontario has made. And who knows what things might look like in 10 to
Yeah.
15 years, of
And
course.
it may, I mean, I'm very bullish about this because I think you've got all the ingredients to really be successful here in the long term. And it may be very, very timely leadership in the entire Canadian sports system, Miles, because there's cynicism out there, I'm sorry to say. People think, oh, we already asked people for too much money and we can't do it. We've already got too much to do. And we tried once and it didn't work. And so people are very sort of gun shy about going down these roads because I think they feel they're setting themselves up to fail. So it's bold, courageous leadership, not just from you, but for the people from the people around you who I know you constantly point to in your humility as a leader. But it's been so great to talk to you. I'm really, really excited about the future for this. And for people who happen to have a little bit of money looking to put it somewhere and love rugby and love all the things you're talking about, where should they go if people want to talk to you about maybe contributing to this, Miles?
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Paul, and really appreciate the opportunity to speak about some of the work we're doing. And yeah, so people can we have information on our website. We are in the process of formalizing the opportunity for people to be able to contribute. And that, like I said, will be through the Canadian Rugby Foundation. So absolutely check us out on rugbyoontario.com as noted, and I'd be pleased to connect with anybody that's interested.
Well, Miles, you've made it 2 appearances. I'm committed to giving you a hat trick at some point and getting you back again for some other topic that I'm sure you're doing really well. But in the meantime, Miles Spencer, CEO of Rugby Ontario, it's been a pleasure chatting with you on the Register Room. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Paul.
Want to tell us what you think of the show and things we could do to make it better? Tell us now at comments@registaroom.com.
Need help managing your amateur sport organization but don't know where to turn? Look no further than Capitus Consulting, your dependable partner to help you through the challenges and issues you routinely face in and around your sport boardroom. At Capitus Consulting, we're different. We've directly managed amateur sport organizations from community club to national governing body. We understand your side of the fence because we've been there ourselves. We know from experience what makes sport organizations successful and where they go wrong. Reach out to us today at capitusconsulting.ca and let's start building your sport business today.
My next guest on the Register Room is one I'm really excited to introduce to you all. Why? Because it is somebody who I really feel has some answers more than questions. Patrick Sampson is the CEO of a company he founded more than 15 years ago called Cogeo. What Cogeo do is they develop lines of revenue and work in spaces in what he calls development, which is actually the correct word for what this is. Development of sports organizations from a revenue capacity in particular. And he focuses very heavily, not solely, but very heavily on the philanthropic fundraising component of this that, as we've discussed so far in this episode, has traditionally been done very poorly. Patrick runs a firm in the US where he raises literally millions of dollars with his great people who work for him, who are incidentally located all around the world, to help organizations in sport and other not-for-profit endeavors diversify revenue and build their organizations to be the sustainable community institutions that they have the potential to become. I'm really excited to be introducing Patrick and Cogeo into the Canadian sports market, and already the meetings we've had with clients of mine, he's shown such an ability to understand what these organizations need to do and can do to unlock enormous amounts of revenue that is untapped in the Canadian sports scene. A great opportunity for you guys to hear why fundraising can work in the Canadian sports system. Take a listen.
Patrick Sampson from Cogeo, welcome to the Register Room.
Thanks, Paul.
Look, great to have you on, and I'm really excited, Patrick, to have you on the Register Room today. As we discussed, I did a podcast episode on fundraising and general revenue development a few episodes ago, and I found it so hard to find content. There's just so few sport organizations who do this well. Why is that, Patrick? Why does sport struggle with this?
Well, it's new to most of them. In the States especially, it's been in other places around the world as well. It has been supported by membership dues. It's been supported by a pay-to-play model. And so those organizations have had, and there are community-based organizations that the model is slightly different, but for most, it's been something that they've been able to make a business out of without considering this. But the time is coming now where a lot of folks across the entire size spectrum are taking this seriously for good reason, as alternative revenue sources.
Yeah, I've been pondering this a lot. I really sense a tipping point really in revenue development in amateur sports, where we, as you say, the system has been particularly big team sports like soccer and hockey and so on. They just go to the well of the fee-based model, right? Sell another program, raise the fees a little bit more, have government rent you facilities, get the odd sponsorship here and there, but it doesn't really matter. You know, if they don't raise much, they're not raising a lot in terms of their overall contribution to top line here in Canada, at least. But I'm getting a sense that people are realizing that there's no choice now. Patrick, you tell a great story about what happened in the States during the Reagan years. Maybe you can give us a little recap of that, because that could be quite interesting for our listeners.
Sure. world is changing around us. There's no doubt about it. And organizations have had the luxury to use the model that they have for a long time with fee-based only elements supporting what they do. But this conversation is starting to come up the same way it did for the universities, first starting in the late 60s. In Cogeo's opinion, that's where professional fundraising really became part of the mainstream. And we're seeing waves of that start to happen in other sectors now. But a really interesting case to study is when Reagan became governor of the state of California in the late 60s and started to rearrange how the public universities were funded. To that point, was mainly funded by government sources. And so the universities were able to keep their costs, public universities at least, very low, if not anything at all. And at the state level in California, the first budgets were really only altered by about 20% because federal was still supporting at a high level. When Reagan then became part of the conversation at the federal level, became president, he took that philosophy to the federal level, and that's where the real change happened in the early 80s. Now it wasn't just a state-funded difference, it was state and federal. And so at that point in time, the public universities really had a moment to think, how do we take our business model and diversify the revenue in a way that will continue to allow us to do what we do really well and not sacrifice any of the quality of the education that we're providing, given that the monetary revenue model has changed. We have to adjust, we have to adapt. So in the early 80s in the United States, that's when the beginnings of professional fundraising tactics and systems and structures really were born out. And you fast that forward to today, and that's why you see large, mature operations at the university level. Now, there are other sectors like youth sport that haven't necessarily made that transformation yet for the reasons we talked about just a bit ago. But it's coming. The world's changing. And it's a great opportunity for sport to learn from those prior historical shifts that other sectors have made and start to do those things as well, so that they can continue to deliver the quality and the access that they have done so well for years and years at every level.
What would you say to people that say, well, look, sorry, Patrick, people just don't have any money. We can't do it.
Let's take a zoom out and look at the folks that are part of leadership at these organizations. And to no fault of their own, they haven't been pushed to learn these things. They're technicians. They are technical directors who
100%.
then are
They're
placed
program
into
operators.
executive.
Yep.
Yes. And so part of the transition that we help people understand is fundraising is much more than dollars in the door. It's fundamental and organizational in the way that you have to prepare for doing professional fundraising. What I would say to those folks is that realize that it's much more comprehensive in what people need to learn and grow and be exposed to do this well at a high level. But the great news is that's extremely accessible with the right knowledge and education. And that can be done at any level. And it can be done at a starting point with some of the smallest organizations to some of the largest. And that's really exciting to us because that transformation with the right leaders leading the way will be incredibly effective for the industry in general.
We're going to get in a minute as to how you do this at Cogeo, because I know you've got a very impressive track record of achieving results in these areas. It kind of reminds me what you're talking about, the same way we recruit volunteers. You know, I get a real feeling in amateur sport these days, and this is kind of part of pop culture, I think. It's become incredibly commoditized, hasn't it? I mean, you just buy your program and then you walk away. And, you know, I ran a big soccer club in Oakville, Ontario, here in Canada, as you know. And one of my first goals I set when I took over was I'm going to make this feel like a European sports club. You know, people are going to make this part of their routine, their identity, their weekly life. I found it incredibly hard. I actually failed. I couldn't do it. About 9/10 of the parents just wanted to drop the kid off and go about their day. There was no connection whatsoever with the club outside of a Visa card. And, and then we sort of turn around and we're like, well, people won't volunteer, people won't donate. How much of this work is just changing your relationship with your membership base, would you say? I mean, talk a little bit about how, before you get to any sort of an ask, how you cultivate a culture that is appropriate for sustained giving and participation. Because I think volunteerism, you're donating your time. It's kind of the same deal, right?
Yeah, I would challenge your audience to think about the few organizations that mean the most to them, whether it's a religious institution, a former school, a current school in their lives and their family, and examine why those institutions are so important to them. It's because of the relationship that they've established with them and the value that they've provided their families. And youth sport has the opportunity to go deeper with the relationships with parents and other stakeholders in the community, just talking about individuals right now, in a way that transforms that entity into the top three in their lives. And so the way that that's done is through we use the word engage, but knowing how to do that work is quite the secret sauce in this. And we can certainly get into that in greater detail, but just knowing at a higher level that when you do this work, the fundamental relationship that you have with your community changes from just a transactional one to one that becomes quite prideful, actually.
We're talking with Patrick Sampson, CEO of Cogeo, about all things fundraising in amateur sport. If you have any questions or comments, drop them to me at comments@registerroom.com, and I will certainly get those questions onto Patrick and we'll address them in the next episode. So, okay, so Patrick, I want to fundraise, right? I want to change this culture. I want to do everything you're doing. How does Cogeo help?
I think a good place to start would be, when do things fall off the tracks? Because I'm a big believer in saying, what can we learn from failure? And in our deep experience, all trains lead to the same station, which is commitment by leadership for this organizational change at whatever level, if you're just starting out or if you're at the largest levels. Educating leadership, and this is board and systems and staff, on what this is first is pivotal to success, because then it aligns everyone in the direction of intention. So getting people on board, literally and figuratively, to the train going in this direction. The second would be time. Now, this doesn't need to necessarily be a full-time thing. We say you need at least 7 hours a week to do this well. And finding that time in little increments is a great place to start. But educating yourself as well. And what are all the tactics that were invented in the early 80s? What is a major gift? What is foundation giving? What is corporate sponsorship? Those elements are pivotal to understand before even going into it. And we have a lot of free resources to help people. So cost is not a factor here in this step. And then coming up with a plan. Again, we have resources to help with this. Like any good endeavor, the plan is only as good as it's executed and as you stay committed to it. But being organized and having that plan is quite key. So first, leadership education. Those around you who are on your board of directors or influencing your leadership of your organization, getting them educated on this. And there are resources that we have available to do that. The second would be a commitment at whatever level it is to doing this work. And the third would be carving out the time. Those are the top three areas where we see people fail. On the contrary, when people do those things well, gosh, the results are phenomenal. In 3 short years or less, it's not uncommon for the amount of money that people receive at every level of club to supersede the amount that they're receiving in membership due. Imagine what that would mean for your budget.
That's unbelievable. I don't think anyone in Canadian amateur sport would think that will be achievable. That's amazing. Yeah. How do you work with, I mean, how does Cogeo actually get involved and do this? Because I don't want people, there's probably a misconception, you probably get it all the time. People think, oh yeah, Patrick, go out and fundraise for me. Bring me $1 million. I'll just be here doing what I normally do, right? But it's not like that, is it? I mean, you're You're not selling fish, you're teaching how to fish here, right?
That's right. And if we were to have one takeaway for people just starting this process, it would be understand that it's equally as important that you work on the roots and organization and structure of your club versus actually going out and doing the professional fundraising tactics, because those things are intertwined. And you can think of them as a root system. You could go out and have one point of a lot of success financially and then not have success beyond that if your organization isn't ready to sustain that. So working on both of those things simultaneously, incredibly important. The way that we do it is to provide a lot of case studies of like organizations so that they can see in their own peers how that's been done. And in the States, we've worked with over 100 of these clubs and governing bodies, et cetera. And what's been most powerful is for them to hear from their peers and see what their peers have done with us in working with their board, recruiting the right people to meet these strategic priorities, engaging people in ways that they never thought were possible through our coaching, making asks of folks who have the capability to give, and have that be something that's a dual experience that's joyful. Those elements are where you really start to see the results that otherwise might appear on the surface as, hey, go fundraise for us and do that. You're absolutely right. That's not what we do. But we pretty much do everything else except the solicitation. This work at the highest level is a absolute mix of science and art. And when we do the work at Cogeo with client partners and sporting clubs in particular, about 10 times out of 10, they don't realize how much influence and how much of an asset they are in communities. Oftentimes, they're the largest aggregator of families beyond religious organizations and schools, sometimes more. The amount of hours that you are exposed to communities, the geographies that you're exposed to. So in any campaign that we're doing, there are 5 revenue potentials. The first is individuals. We've talked a lot about those. But there are also foundations that have missions, and those missions can be aligned to the work, not necessarily directly of sport. So good examples would be mental health, getting off of screens, socioeconomic interactions, leadership development, all sorts of things. We all know youth sport develops. Missions can be aligned that don't necessarily fund youth sport directly, but they would see it as a conduit to their missions. The third is companies. It's much more of a return on investment relationship, and that's okay. Understand how much of an asset you are, not a charitable contribution, but an asset to marketing departments. The fourth is city, county, state government, sometimes federal. Depending on your jurisdiction, there can be a lot of opportunities, but generally, ones that we have the most success with are economic. So you invest X, get 2X, 3X because of travel tourism. And that typically goes into facility development. And then the final area is educational institutions. Those show up generally as partnerships, one way or another.
Before I let you go, Patrick, well, it's great. I mean, you mentioned so much about the support Cogeo gives, which I think is so important for these organizations just to help them along the way. But what commitment would you say is needed from them to engage you and do this properly? Because there's probably listeners saying, oh, I'm interested in this, but how much is it going to cost? How much time will we have? What if we don't get any success? There's all those little creepy crawly fears in people's heads. What would you say in terms of, okay, this is what it's going to take, and this is your best chance of success?
There are 2 buckets for that. There are those that just focus on the money piece, and then there are those that, at the top of our discussion here, we talked about investing in the roots of the organization to make permanent change. And so you can go off and do grants here and there, make an ask of an individual or a company or a foundation here and there, and that can be minimal time, and it can allow you to have funding on the auxiliary edges come in. And if you're going to do that, that would take maybe 3 to 5 hours a week to do. And you can do that on your own, and it's a great place to start, potentially to understand and get familiar with the different funding mechanisms. Again, I'll repeat them. There are 5. Generally, it's individuals, foundations, corporations, government, and educational institutions. It's really important that everyone understand that each of those have a different value proposition. But as someone who's operating the entity, it's your role to maximize the return for all of those stakeholders, and they're slightly different. So that's one layer. And quite candidly, 3 to 5 hours a week could get you there to start with the right proper introductory education. If you want to go deeper and you really want to make this a transformational shift, the same way that the public university example in the early 80s we gave at the top of the conversation did, and then to earn the results of the transformational resources that they did over time, we're talking about a minimum to start of 7 hours a week. And this could go anywhere up into full-time jobs. But we also understand at Cogeo that we have to, when we're starting this process with a new group that's never done it before, that has to be an incremental stair step. And so just know that you have the opportunity to do this work at the level of 5 full-time employees, even at the smallest clubs, let alone the largest ones. But starting out, have a real strong leadership board that gets the strategic priority, understands and values it. So there will be some time to recruit those folks to align into your leadership circles. And then the actual work itself, minimum of 7 hours a week on the organizational transformational side of things. And then as you progress for your first 3 years, more than likely that should shift to about 20 hours a week. And by the way, that's a really good thing, because that means as a leader, your organization's maturing, and the things that you were doing that you probably shouldn't be doing as your executive position will start to transform. Here in the States and in other universities throughout the world, those most mature organizations, and we look at those as sort of the pinnacle of the model of maturity, those leaders are spending 50% of their job description time in fund development. And that surprises a lot of people. Of course, that's not where we're going to start today when you're starting your journey, but just understand that that can be and should be the end result of this work over a number of years.
Yeah, and I think any listeners who are in any sort of executive role in a commercial organization would shrug and go, yeah, absolutely, 50% of my time on business development. You may not be out knocking on doors and making cold calls, but you're absolutely driving top line.
Correct.
But I talk to so many executive directors, Patrick, and most of their time is spent dealing with parent squabbles and little tactical issues that are usually crises and storms in a teacup and this sort of thing. And they just get stuck in the weeds on it. Meanwhile, this really important core value-adding function is left there. Look, Patrick, it's been phenomenal talking to you. I could talk to you about this for hours, as you know, and no doubt I will later on. But I mean, I just really want listeners to understand that this isn't nonsense here. This isn't hot air. This is real. Cogeo have done this. They've raised literally millions of dollars for amateur sport organizations that are just like yours. They're not huge organizations with big staff where it's a shoe-in or a layup. Listen to what Patrick said, key though, about those initial areas of setting culture. It starts in the boardroom, folks. You must have a boardroom that delivers this. And as Patrick says, sees this as a core part of operations as raising your financial accounts or running your programs on the field or the ice or on court. Questions to me, please, at comments@registerroom.com. If you want to hear from Patrick, if you want to talk to him more, book a meeting, also send me a note on that email address and we can set up a discussion directly with him to see how Cogeo can possibly help your organization. And be ambitious, folks. I hope the other thing that we've shown you in this interview is don't devalue your organization. And asking for financial support is not a dirty thing to do. There are lots of wealthy people out there who are looking for opportunities to put their life's work to moral good. And that will make them more happy than you will be for receiving it. Right, Patrick? I mean, again, we should not underestimate the satisfaction and return on investment that may be more emotional or spiritual or what have you, that goes to the donor when they do this, right?
Bring up such great points, and there's a couple that I want to touch on before we jump
quickly.
off.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah. The first is over and over again when leaders do this work, they come to realize that they personally are not asking. They are a conduit and asking on behalf of the organization. And that reframe really helps folks. The second is you're absolutely right. There are, out of the 5 revenue stream stakeholders, every single one of them, the relationship deepens and there's value exchange. The third is that there's going to be a large transformation of wealth occurring in the next 20 years worldwide. Some of those folks don't have children. They are looking for places to invest. Become the place that meets their needs and goals.
Patrick Sampson, CEO of Cogeo, thanks for joining me today in the Register Room.
Thanks, Paul.
How does your amateur sport organization measure up post-pandemic? Need to know? Capitalist Consulting is proud to bring you the Canadian Amateur Sport Health Check, the first comprehensive study of the Canadian amateur sport industry at community level, examining how it was before the pandemic and how it looks now. Built on data from hundreds of organizations, just like yours, this report helps you measure your organization's recovery from the pandemic against others across the country. Participation rates, volunteer levels, sponsorship valuations, program fees and costs, and staff salary levels that give you market rates for sport job positions you simply can't find anywhere else. It's all here and much more. The Canadian Amateur Sport Health Check. Get your copy today at capitalistlearning.com.
Imagine not having the chance to play sports as a kid. Imagine not having those memories, those experiences. Imagine your childhood without them.
If I wasn't able to play, I would have missed my friends. I would miss being active and the chance of being competitive. Basketball has taught me how to work as a team, how to communicate, and how to adapt to any situation. My goal is to play for Team Canada and make it to the WNBA.
The skills kids learn through sports are carried with them throughout their lives. But all across Canada, kids are being left on the sidelines because they don't have the resources to play. We owe all kids a chance to experience everything that sport has to offer. Help unleash the full potential in every child. Visit kidsport.ca so all kids can play.
So guess what, folks? It actually can be done in Canada. Cogeo can help you, and Rugby Ontario are showing you. So why aren't you getting started? As has been mentioned so much in this episode, sports fundraising is now a must-have, not a nice-to-have. So for goodness sake, lean into it and get started. And if you want to learn more, in particular would like to chat to Cogeo about what they do to be a partner of yours in this, drop me a note at, as usual, comments at registerroom.com. But for now, here are my main takeaways on this topic. Number 1, it all starts with the cause. So find out the one that matters to your club, but also make sure it's compelling. No one's going to give you money for shits and giggles. Okay, make sure you've got something that people believe in, can get excited about, and are prepared to open their wallet for. Work out what the cause is, work out how to frame it so it's compelling, and explain what this cause does to your donor base in the long run. Number 2, build a coalition. Don't make this all about you. It's about your organization and, more importantly, your community. So get as many people involved as you can, particularly people who've got credibility and or influence in your community, because their involvement gives your campaign weight and validation, and that drives donations. Number 3, use professionals. Fundraising isn't something you can do by just throwing together a committee of hard-working and well-meaning volunteers and hoping for the best. Amateur sports' favorite tactic, right? No, it's a trained discipline, so treat it that way, all right? Cogeo's built to do this. It allows you to run your organization while they help you get this done, and you can do both at the same time. So I really suggest you drop me an email. Number 4, cultivate and celebrate your donors. They're not sales properties, okay? They're people. They give to a cause. They're not investing in a marketing opportunity like corporate sponsors do. They're investing in things that matter. So show them how their investment's making a difference. Bring them into your organization in every respect. Make them feel part of it. And when they give, like you're asking them to do, make sure you show them where their money is going, where their investment's making a difference, and make them feel that they are genuinely part of your organization. You're in the Regista Room, the podcast where amateur soccer goes off-field. As always, it's been my utter pleasure to be with you. Thanks for listening. And until the next episode, wherever you're tuning in from around the world, stay safe and stay well.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Regista Room, where amateur soccer goes off-field. Join us again for the next episode. Subscribe today at capituslearning.com or listen wherever you access your favorite podcasts.